Mayor John Rand.
Well, thank you, Philip, for the kind introduction. Philip was a remarkable member of the CRD board, and he really is missed there. It's unfortunate that he's not still there. I really don't know why I'm here, other than the fact that Philip asked me to. I'm not an expert on marijuana.
We have plenty of experts.
Yeah, we've got lots of experts, but I'm not personally even a fan of marijuana. I've got no desire to take it. I'm a farmer. I don't grow it. I only grow the stuff that doesn't earn money. And I'm certainly not an expert on it. But I do have considerable experience. I do have, lawmaking is always experiments, but I do have considerable experience in making laws, both regionally and locally. And I really know how destructive bad laws can be. I'm going to, because I can't talk with any authority on marijuana, I'm going to have to slip into something a little more esoteric here and just tell you how laws are formed and the criteria that we should use when we're making laws, and I hope that we use when we try to reform this ones on the drug issue that we have right now. In a free society, in any free society, we must rely on voluntary compliance. In a police state, you don't have to so much. You can rely on fear, you can rely on intimidation, you can overrun human rights, but we can't do any of those things, and it's a good thing too in a free society. In a democratic society, we have to rely on personal responsibility, and that's really what this whole thing is about. And because of that, there is a tremendous onus on those who write laws. Because if we write laws that don't work, and we do it enough times, and ultimately our society doesn't work. So, in trying to think of what I was going to say today, and thinking about, okay, if we want to replace this thing, how do we best go about it? I sort of made a little checklist on how to make a law. And it's a checklist that people should go through, but often don't, unfortunately. It's very easy to sit there and respond to public pressure, or political pressure, or to have your staff suggest things and you just go ahead and do it. But you really need to go through this checklist if you're in the business of making laws. So the first question you ask yourself, what's the reason for this law? Is there a legitimate need for it? Or are you just responding to maybe political pressure, minority groups, whatever else? And you have to really research it. But you also have to ask, does this support the overarching objectives of our society? A lot of times we write laws just, we need a law for this, we need a law for that, and we forget what it actually does to our society. And that's one of my big concerns about this one, the drug business. So once you've done that, and you figured out, okay, we do have a need, then you have to ask the question, does it make sense to our population? If it doesn't make sense, then we have no business making that law. Those of us who are making those laws represent the population. If we're making laws that the population doesn't want, we shouldn't be doing it. So then the next question that we have to ask is a slight variation of that. Does it make sense to the target population? A lot of times we think, boy, that law, we need a law for this, but we forget that it has to make sense to the people that we're actually directing the law to. We've got a number of examples of failures when we do that. And when we do that, and write a law that doesn't make sense to the target population, you're guaranteed a lot of non-compliance, and that's when your troubles really start. Now we know that whatever law we write, it's not going to make sense to some people, but we hope that it makes sense to few enough that we can then deal with it. So that's, once we get past this first set of criteria, then we take a look at the next list. First thing you have to ask yourself is can we enforce it? Can we enforce the law we just wrote? Or we're about to? A good example of traffic lights. I mean, that's a municipal function. I mean, everybody hates getting stopped at traffic. Oh, geez, another red light. But we all do it. We do it because we know that it makes sense. If we don't do it, then we're putting ourselves and others at peril. It actually, traffic lights makes traffic go faster than it would if we didn't. So even though we don't want to do it, we still do it because it makes sense. And the very few that don't, it's easy to enforce it. It's easy to spot them. We have electronic means. It's easy for the police to see, and the penalties for it are quick and direct. So we can really enforce that law. To get away from that a little bit, we've got speed limits, for example. Now, there's a lot of places in our province where the speed limits are a lot lower than the design speed. So there you're starting to see a lot of mass non-compliance, and people start driving, everybody. I mean, my municipality is a classic example. We have 50-mile-an-hour speed limits on 50 kilometer speed limits on 70-kilometer roads. So everybody drives 65, 70. There's a non-compliance there, so the law has to accept, okay, well, we're going to have to give this big gap. We're going to have to ignore the law in a sense, because everybody's going over the speed limit. So you're starting to get away from, you're starting to get non-compliance when you get into that thing. So that's something you really have to be careful of. Can we enforce this law? The next question about enforcing is, can we afford to force the law? And that's a big one. Especially for municipalities who don't have a lot of money. If your law is constructed in a way that in order to enforce it, you're going to have to go to a court, to the courts a lot of the times, then you're in trouble. First of all, you don't know what the outcome is going to be. Second of all, you're going to have to put in an awful lot of effort. You have to go through your bylaw enforcement, you have to do there's a great list of things in order to prepare for court. When you go there, all of this is very expensive. So if you write a law that relies on ultimately taking people to court, then you're going to have to start either saying, well, we're just not going to be able to do it, or you're going to have to be selective about it. And as soon as you start doing that, you weaken the perspective, the public perspective of your authority. And that's very bad for your governments. As soon as the public starts to think, okay, well, hey, these guys, they're not going to take me to court. They just don't have the money, we can see it, so I'm just going to go ahead and do what I want anyways. And that's when you start to get a breakdown of your governance and a breakdown of your laws. One of the things that when you're creating a law is that you have to look at what are your desired outcomes. And usually, when we're writing laws, or all too often when we're writing laws, is that we look at it from a generalist sense. Yeah, we're going to write this law and it's just going to be good for us, right? It's going to solve our problems. You don't get into exactly what it is that you want your desired outcome to be. If you did, then you'll start probably looking at more regulation than prohibition. And the next thing, and this is something that is really not done often enough when we look at outcomes, is what are the undesired outcomes? Because every law that we write has got undesired outcomes. And you have to really look at it to make sure that your undesired outcomes don't overwhelm or create a situation worse than your desired outcomes. A lot of laws make things worse than when you started, and if you've done that, well, then you're really in trouble. But unfortunately, that happens quite a bit. The final thing on the checklist is achievable results. Even if you meet all of these things, and if you do meet all of the other criteria, your chances of having a successful law are pretty good. But still, oftentimes, you don't get the results that you expect. And for municipalities who bear the cost of and the brunt of enforcing laws, if you're not getting a result, it's a very serious drain on your resources. So you always have to look at the laws you've created to make sure you're continually getting the result you want. Once again, because you're wasting your resources, but also because you're telling your population that the laws, your laws, are really not of a benefit to their society. And that starts to again take us into the non-compliance field. When we look at the drug laws and compare them to this checklist, they fail in every single one. Unfortunately, that's not unusual. There's always examples of laws that have perhaps gone too long and society's changed. I mean, there's lots of reasons why, but we do have a number of laws that fail these criteria and don't produce the results. And it's the responsibility of the lawmakers to continually look at it and ensure that they do. But the problem that I see more than anything here with the drug laws is that all these things that, they may not work, they're causing problems and everything, they cause the non-compliance, it's adults that are doing it. And adults generally have the ability to pick and choose. Yeah, you can go faster than the speed limit, you can put a secondary speed in even though the laws say not to. You do all of these things, but you still have the fundamental belief that laws should be obeyed. But the drug laws are affecting our children. The children, the young generations are the ones that are being told, hey, yeah, there's a law there. It's a serious law. It's a federal law. But don't worry about it. We're not going to enforce it. That's a hell of a message that we're sending. And the ramifications of that are very serious when we go back to the importance of having voluntary compliance. We're teaching our younger generations that if you don't agree with the law, you don't need to obey it. That's just a very bad thing to do. For governance models to function, there has to be a fundamental respect for society. And the respect generally flows out of your laws and your systems. So what's at stake here isn't just bad laws, stuff like that. What's at stake is a fundamental loss of respect in our younger generations of our ability to make laws that make sense, our ability to have a society and a structure that it's important to voluntarily comply with, essentially. And that's why I feel so strongly that we have to reform. As a lawmaker, all lawmakers, we have to make sure that our laws work for the protection, the long-term protection of